Hi guys, my name is Kirsty and welcome back to Upside Down Books, and today we're going to be talking about everything that I read in February. As you may be aware, I was away. I was overseas at the very beginning of February, and generally speaking I had a slower, cruisier pace in the reading month, but I read some really great books and also some really crap books. And so let's have a look at them and talk about them today. One of my reading goals in 2023 is to be very chill about my reading and take the pressure off so that I'm not gunning to just read and read a bajillion books all the time. And it's also to complete series. And I'm promising and keep promising and probably will actually make a video about my 2023 goals, but this week is not the week. I thought, let's start with the physical books that I read, of which I have 3, and then I had 2 digital books. It was 5 books all up that I managed to read in February, and I'm pretty pleased with that considering I really wasn't trying too hard. So the first book I want to talk about is The Lost World by Michael Crichton. Now this is book number 2 in the Jurassic Park series and I am obsessed. If you are also a dinosaur fan, then I can't recommend enough that you try his stuff out. The Lost World was published in 1995, so a lot of like Michael Crichton stuff, or I guess the Jurassic Park stuff, is like what, 20-30 years old now? 30 years old almost. So we're moving on in time and we're going back into some, I don't know, older fiction. It feels really weird to call the 90s old because I feel like I'm calling myself old when I do that, but whatever. I've always been aware that Jurassic Park was based on a book, and I wasn't aware that it was part of a series pretty much until I started reading Jurassic Park and saw on Goodreads that it had like a little series link. But I have just been hesitant to actually pick it up because the family copy that we have of Jurassic Park is like this mass market paperback, and I ended up going in with audiobook. However, there is no audiobook currently available, at least through Audible, for book number 2, which is The Lost World, so I ended up searching high and low. I kid you not, this took me so long to find a copy of this in a bookstore, but it was such a good challenge to try and find it on store and not to relent and give up and order it online. Now, very similar to book 1, this is all about a disaster, and it is a thrilling story involving dinosaurs being brought back to life and a bunch of people being stuck on an island with them. In this book we have one familiar character, and that is Malcolm. Now Malcolm plays a key role, and particularly in really creating a strong sense of foreshadowing in Jurassic Park, so I was really excited to see him coming back again for this book. Almost all the other characters were new characters, but filling in very similar roles to what we had in book 1. There's a lot to be said for perhaps declaring that this might be the same plot from book 1 redone in book 2, but I found it to actually be surprisingly different enough and really enjoyable, and it didn't just feel like it was washing out the same story that it had previously. We've still got 2 kids that get involved. We've got some guy who has much to prove and wants to stroke his ego, and so is really pushing the agenda of getting people to come across with him to do some research and see what is going on this island and figure it out and get some answers so that he can just build his fame and reputation. And of course that just draws in a whole bunch of innocent people who have good intentions in their heart, and they are now fighting for their lives, trying to survive on an island that is filled with dinosaurs that are back from the dead. Jurassic Park and its sequel, The Lost World, make for such a thrilling read that's an absolute page turner because there's a very real threat and it's done in such a realistic way. Michael Crichton is a fabulous science fiction writer, and I found that the way that he builds in the science into the fiction makes it very believable, and you could just totally see this happening in real life. You've got this constant sense of threat as creatures that you're familiar with from the movies and just other places, like the T-Rexes and the Velociraptors. They're all there and they're just like 2 steps away from eating someone constantly. People are like running out of gas, they're driving cars through the wilderness on this island, and they're like within seconds of their life trying to escape various dinosaurs at various parts in the book, and everyone's survival is basically hanging on by a thread with just like the smallest window of opportunity for them to solve a mystery or to get somewhere or to do something that will save them and get them off the island. Of course, just like with the first one, this does involve some gory deaths. It's not too bad, but it is a little bit descriptive, so if you really don't like violence or animals eating people, then I think it is fair to say, and perhaps already quite obvious, that the Jurassic Park books are probably not for you. But this was a 5-star read for me and I loved it. I just powered through this and I was so happy that it was different to book 1. Different things are happening. There is a legitimate reason for this resurgence of dinosaurs in terms of being within the plot again. And I just thought, generally speaking, the ways that they dealt with the dinosaurs and the different dinosaurs that come across in this book made it exciting and a new story and gave it something refreshing. And there's a really strong female character in this, which is always a great thing. So I cannot recommend recommends the Jurassic Park books enough, and I certainly think that The Lost World has just as much to give as book 1. The next book was another 5-star read, and one that I am just going to be recommending until the cows come home, and that is the Bromance book club by Lyssa Kay Adams. Now, Lyssa Kay Adams has written this series, and I don't know what else she's written, but I am so there for it. This is actually a 5-book series, and it's a contemporary romance story. It's very funny, and I'm not sure if I'd peg it as YA because none of the characters fit into that genre, but it reads very much so in the vein of YA romance. I picked this up because I've actually been looking for this for a long time, believe it or not. I've always been really taken in by this cover and by the title, and I didn't find it until I got to a romance specialist bookstore in New Zealand, which I talked about in my latest book haul. I sorely regret not buying all 5 books when I saw them then and there on the shelf. This is hilarious. You have a guy who is in an ailing marriage, and he is trying to figure out what has gone wrong and how he can fix things. Basically, his marriage has fallen apart when he suddenly discovers that his partner has been faking it in bed all along. And he's really gutted by this. This is like a massive blow to his pride. And I think it also sets the scene for the real sense of sort of laughing at the expense of men that the author is establishing here. It's not a man-hating book, don't get me wrong. It's just having a little bit of a laugh at the hopelessness of some men and how much they struggle to understand what women want. This is definitely a piece of feminist fiction. So the story all sparks from him leaving the house and trying to figure out what has gone wrong and where he is failing and can he save his marriage, when his teammates who are on his sporting team, as he is a high-level athlete, reveal that they actually have the Bromance book club. And in this book club, they are reading like bodice ripper romance novels that are written by women so that they can study them and discuss them and try and understand what it is that women want. They came to the conclusion that as these romance books are written by women, the men that are portrayed in these books must be displaying some behavior that women think is desirable, or it is very black and white as to what is right and what is the wrong thing to do in order to curry favor and win back the hearts of women. It is hilarious. The fact that there is just this group of men that are kind of stereotypically sitting in a very masculine area are stepping outside of this comfort zone, and it's very much so that because a lot of them are reluctant to do so at first and are exploring these things and opening up. It's a really beautiful look at breaking down toxic masculinity, but more than that, it is just simply a bloody hilarious read. If you want to be laughing your socks off, this is a book you should definitely get. It's so funny as he reads through the chapters and tries to take lessons from each section of the romance book and apply it to his next course of action in trying to save his marriage. It's really, really, really funny to follow along. I adored this. I will be reading every other book in the series. I'm so curious how you can write a 5-book series about this. I'm not quite sure where we will go, but I am nonetheless just absolutely taken by this and so keen to read whatever else Lyssa Kay Adams has written, because this was just quality fiction and just so innocent and uplifting, and yet actually touching on really important topics. The next and the last physical book that I read in February was a 1-star read, and that was The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I hated this book and I can't say how much I don't recommend it. There was nothing problematic with this book. This was just, in my opinion, a really, really bad story. It was so boring. I did a buddy read of this with Chris and we both struggled. I found it fascinating that as we went through reading it and shared our thoughts and opinions on Instagram, you can follow me on Instagram at OzBooksNail if you want to keep up with my opinions when I do these buddy reads with Chris. I was really shocked by the number of people who came back to me and said that they too either DNF'd this or they just really, really hated it. I hadn't heard a bad word about this until that point. I'd heard some mixed reviews, but I certainly hadn't heard just how many people were not finishing this book. This is obviously the Fairy Loot Special Edition, and I am going to be selling on both this and the sequel, which I unfortunately was just so confident that I would love this I had bought, because I really, really didn't enjoy this. There was almost no plot in it. You are just waiting and waiting for something to happen. The blurb and the hype around it from TikTok really sets you up to believe that it's really exciting and that it's set in this dark academia world, that the Alexandra Library is involved, but like when you actually get to the story, none of that delivers. There's hardly any magic that's interesting. The magic is not explained. The characters are two-dimensional. Some of them lean really heavily and kind of uncomfortably on stereotypes. It's not really problematic, as I said, but it's certainly not very good character building or writing, and it's all over the shop. People have said that it's worth reading through because the last 25% is where it gets good. In my opinion, you should not have to read that far into a book to be enjoying it. The whole thing should be enjoyable, even if it's for different reasons, but I was bored out of my brains reading this and I just detested it. I didn't think that the last 25% was worth it. I didn't think that the revelations that happened there were satisfying, interesting, or even particularly clever. It was just confusing, and as I said, nothing happens. So I really don't recommend this. I have my full review up on my blog, which is ozbooksnail.com, or on Goodreads if you follow me there, and I've got a quick mini review up on Instagram if you want to read further thoughts. But I didn't enjoy this, and I will not be continuing the series. There are so many other books that are better. I wouldn't waste your time on this one. So that brings me to the digital books that I read in February. The first one was another really low star rating for me, and that was a 2-star rating, and it was actually more of a podcast. It was called Good, Great, Perfect. It's this one here. It was free on Audible, and so it sounded interesting. It was analysing perfectionism, and it is non-fiction. It's written by a professional in the medical sphere. She's either a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I can't remember which one, and she breaks down what perfectionism is and how it impacts your life and how you can be aware of it, and sort of looks at I don't know, aiming for slightly less than perfect. I don't think I identify myself as someone with perfectionism, but I did think it would just make for an interesting read. I gave it 2 stars though, because I just think this is a podcast that's been made into a book and it doesn't work. If it was a podcast, maybe it would be alright, but on the whole, she just addresses you as my lovelies all the time, which is really annoying. There's massive repetition of the title, as the podcast episodes are literally just stitched together without much care or thought how that would translate in an audiobook listening experience. It was just irritating and aggravating, like deeply so. It's really short, but anyway, I guess my main thoughts on this were, I think there were some really great and interesting points about perfectionism, and just not necessarily full-blown perfectionism, but ways of managing expectations in it. However, I much rather would have read a blog post about this, and I don't think the audiobook is the way to go. Maybe her podcast is, but this narrator and style of writing / talking did not work for me in any sense of the word. And the last book that I finished in February was A Darkling Plain by Philip Reeve, and this is book 4 in the Mortal Engines quartet, and I loved it. I've been putting this one off for a while because it's quite a long audiobook, and I didn't love book 3 in the Mortal Engines series. This is a classic dystopian, futuristic sci-fi book, and it's a fabulous series. In this series, the world has experienced a 60-second war where someone's pushed a big red button and everything has just gone to crap, basically, and it's just wastelands as far as the eye can see. What people have done, what humanity has done, is they have compiled and built up cities to put them on wheels and massive tracks, and they roam as mobile cities over the lands and through the wastelands, and the bigger cities capture and eat the smaller cities, which means they're dismantling them for parts. And the first book is set in London, and it's just really hilarious when you're trying to imagine these big cities that have just been sort of scooped up and put on wheels in some really hard to imagine but also really funny way. And they're going around and there's so many rivalries and prejudices, and the language is a bit different. Great quirk this and great posket that. It's so great. There's really rich characters. This is real like 2000s fantasy writing style, in my opinion. I say fantasy writing because I'm most strongly associated with that genre, even though this is probably sci-fi, where you've got characters with great names, you've got exceptional character development, and just characters that are really well built and tangible, and the world itself is really fun to explore. The plot is multi-layered, with the fact that there's this war going on, the fact that it's sort of the tractionists versus the anti-tractionists of people who don't want the mobile cities going around continuing to destroy the wastelands and any chance of rejuvenating the land, and then the people that are like, it's the only way to be. And then of course there are things called stalkers, and these are bionic people who've been recreated as like a cyborg, and they are so unkillable, and they're set out by evil people to go and basically work as assassins, most commonly in the story. Following this story the whole way through to book 4 has been a real experience. I loved book 1, I loved book 4, I enjoyed book 2, and book 3 was a stumbling point for me, and that's because books 1 and 2 versus book 3 and 4 follow different characters as a main focus. There's a bit of time progression as you follow characters as they age throughout, and I think I, as a first reading of this series, struggled to adapt to a different leading set of characters in book 3, and by the time I got to book 4, which is Darkling Plain, I was totally au fait with it and I loved it and I was really on board with the whole thing. I thought the trajectory of the plot in book 4 worked well. I'm not going to say any spoilers, I just think it was a very, very lovely and satisfactory ending to the series, and I think that the plot arc, not only within the book itself but the way it finished off the whole series, just like tied together beautifully. It felt like effortless writing and it was just great fun going on so many adventures, and all the characters that you have met without the series coming full circle to reveal what their actual intentions are and what their purpose in the story has been the whole time. What are they finally bringing to this like final curtain call? It was brilliant and I loved it. I will be recommending this one over and over again. I can't wait to reread the series at some point. I've done all of them on audiobook, so I think next time I would love to read them. So that is everything that I read in February. It was a really lovely reading month, even though it came with highs and lows. I read like 1-star reads or 5-star reads, so it was like extremes on both ends, but I had a great time. So I would love to know from you in the comments down below if you have read any of these or if you're planning to, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.
Alla gloria mia